On March 12, 2011, Rachel Lay, the manager of the Lululemon store, arrived at work at 8 a.m. as usual to open the store. She noticed that the door was open and assumed it was due to the negligence of the person who closed the store the night before. When Rachel entered the store, the lights were off, and clothing and accessories were scattered everywhere. Realizing the store had been robbed, she called out to see if anyone was there and heard a groan, startled her, prompting her to rush outside to call the police. Next to the Lululemon store was an Apple store, which opened at 10 a.m. A man named Ryan Hodable was waiting outside. Rachel asked him to accompany her back to the Lululemon store, which Ryan agreed without knowing the context. The day before, the second-generation iPad tablets had been presented, and Ryan was waiting for the Apple store to open to buy one. When they entered the Lululemon store, Rachel asked Ryan to go to the back of the store to see where the groan came from. She had heard earlier. Ryan went to the back room and saw a body lying face down in a pool of blood. Called out to the manager to call the police, as it appeared to be a human body. As Ryan left the back room, he noticed another woman with her hands bound, seemingly unconscious but still breathing. Ryan told Rachel that one woman was dead and another was alive, and it appeared both been assaulted. Rachel called the police a second time. The officers quickly arrived at the scene. It was around 8:20 a.m. when they saw the horrific scene. The store had apparently been robbed. One woman was dead in a pool of blood, and the other was alive but unresponsive, bound with tape, injured in the face. The victims were identified as Lululemon employees Jana Murray, the deceased, and Brittany Norwood, survivor. Both worked the evening shift and closed the store around 10 p.m. It was unclear if it was a robbery, a revenge act, or if Jana tried to protect the store and was killed while Brittany survived by complying with the perpetrator's demands. Brittany Norwood was taken to a hospital on the outskirts of the city for her injuries to be treated and to determine if she needed to be hospitalized. At that time, the extent of her injuries was unknown. She had visible lacerations on her chest, legs, arms, and forehead. The most noticeable was a 5 centimeters long cut on her right thumb, possibly sustained while trying to defend herself from a knife attack. Jana Murray's body was taken to the forensic morgue for an autopsy. The results were unexpected, as the attack was brutal, and she had more severe injuries than her colleague, indicating she might have tried to resist the robber, or it was possible that Jana was the reason the attacker came to the premises to kill her directly. The autopsy revealed that Jana Murray's body had a total of 330 wounds, suggesting an extremely violent attack, typically motivated by rage. Question arose: who could have been so angry or filled with so much hatred to inflict so many wounds? This wasn't just murder, but also torture, as Jana remained conscious for most of the ordeal. The number of wounds suggested a very personal attack by someone who hated her. At the crime scene, forensic experts also found one of the most crucial pieces of evidence in the case: a bloody footprint from a Reebok sports shoe, size 46. They concluded that this footprint belonged to the person who committed the attacks. Both female victims of the attacks had athletic backgrounds. Jana Murray was born on November 22, 1980, in Houston, Texas. At the time of her murder, she was 30 years old. Her family included her parents, David and Phyllis, herself and 2 other siblings. Everyone said she was a very positive woman. Jana traveled the world, including to China for studies, and visited various places in Asia, including Japan. One of her hobbies was staying healthy, exercising, and especially practicing yoga. On her last birthday, when she turned 30, Jana filmed herself bungee jumping, showing her adventurous and joyful spirit. Her enthusiasm for sports was evident from a young age. She participated in ballet, jazz, step dancing, volleyball, and more. Details of her life included her passion for Mexican food, and her family now visits her favorite Mexican restaurant every year on her birthday to remember her. Everyone in her life spoke highly of her, and no one understood why Jana was harmed or killed. Investigators questioned everyone, including her boyfriend whom she planned to marry, but no one had a motive. It seemed Jana had no enemies, but someone secretly hated her. After graduating from college, Jana moved to Arlington, Virginia, to attend Johns Hopkins University. During this time, she went to the Lululemon store in that city looking for a job, but they told her they weren't hiring. However, Montgomery County store in Bethesda, Maryland was hiring. Despite it being a half-hour drive away, she didn't want to miss the opportunity because she loved the brand. Jana submitted her resume and was hired a few days later, not only because of her yoga skills but also because of her personality. She became one of the top sellers at Lululemon. In contrast to Jana, Brittany, the second victim, had a more complicated life. Brittany Norwood was born into a poor family with 8 siblings and had little reason to smile. She and her family constantly faced racism, yet her classmates noticed she never lost her composure and was very cheerful. Sports, especially soccer, helped her. Brittany played soccer in high school and became one of the best players in her neighborhood, earning a scholarship to New York University. Her dream was to play for the official U.S. women's national team and participate in the World Cup. But this dream was cut short by financial constraints and lack of opportunities. Brittany studied sociology at New York University, where she had a scholarship, then moved to Arlington, Virginia, where she worked 2 jobs, in a hotel and at a Lululemon shop. Reports say she was transferred to the Montgomery County store shortly before the attack. Both women lived in Arlington at the time of the attack, led different lives, but shared a passion for sports. They might have been targeted by someone who intended to harm them. Sadly, one of them died, but at least one woman survived, possibly to bring justice for her colleague. The initial evidence found at the crime scene included the bloody footprint of a man and a knife used as the primary weapon in the attack. Investigators noted that multiple items from the store were used to inflict Jana's wounds. Additionally, 3 bundles of money were missing from the locker. It should not be overlooked that the surviving woman, Brittany Norwood, might explain how it all happened and who was responsible. Her description could lead the police to a clue. The robbery suggested that this could have been the main motive. The number of injuries didn't match how robberies are usually carried out. In most cases, robbers don't intend to kill unless they feel compelled to if they are caught or the person refuses to comply. Moreover, these murders are typically quick and involve firearms. But Jana was attacked with a knife, and the attacker took the time to torture. On March 12th at 2:35 p.m., Brittany Norwood was first questioned in a suburban hospital. She stated that the attack was not carried out by one person, by 2 masked men. One of them dealt with Jana, and the other attacked her. According to her version, she was assaulted with a coat hanger. Brittany could not provide more details, as she was under sedation. Officers agreed to question her again in the coming days if she remembered anything else. The same day, investigators questioned the staff of the neighboring Apple store, which was open until 11 p.m., knowing that the attacks must have taken place around that time. They asked if anyone had seen anything, and the first witness came forward, saying he had only heard voices. He said he heard 2 female voices. One of them screamed, "Talk to me, don't do this, tell me what's going on," and the other female voice said, "Oh my God, help me, please help me." Then he only heard screams and groans, and when everything went quiet, he noticed the sound of someone dragging something. Surprisingly, the witness, an Apple employee, did not call the police. He simply reported the matter to a security guard who checked the Lululemon store, looked out the window, found nothing unusual, and returned to the Apple store. The employee also testified that he later reported this to the Apple store manager and left work around 11 p.m., after which no more noise was heard. Investigators went to Brittany Norwood's apartment to see if she remembered anything else about the incident. When they entered the apartment, she invited them to the living room to talk. They asked her if she could remember anything else from the past 2 days to help identify the 2 men she had mentioned. Brittany tried to explain how the events unfolded, saying that when the 2 men entered the room, one went straight to her while the other grabbed Jana. Brittany described her attackers as white men wearing ski masks and estimated from their voices that they were between 25 and 27 years old. She noted that her attacker was about 165 centimeters tall, and Jana's attacker was slightly taller at about 180 centimeters. Both were dressed in black and wore gloves. Brittany also said that her attacker, after killing her colleague, wanted to rob the store while the other started assaulting her. As she began talking about Jana's murder and her own assault, she started crying. It was clear that Brittany had gone through something traumatic, but the investigators needed as much information as possible because she was the only survivor and the only eyewitness at the crime scene. Brittany also mentioned that the man said to her, "Your name is Brittany, and you live on such and such a street," which scared her even more. But she also told the investigators that she believed the attackers might have seen 2 bills in her wallet for internet and utilities, which had her name and address on them and were likely stolen. Another detail Brittany mentioned was that her attacker, while assaulting her, began insulting her and even made racist remarks. After the insults, the man pushed her onto Jana's body, which was already lifeless at that point. The investigators asked Brittany if her family was supporting her. She confirmed this and said she had talked to her family about moving back to Seattle for safety reasons, but also mentioned that she had recently started a new job in Bethesda and was looking forward to returning to work once she recovered from her injuries. Since the attackers knew Brittany's address, the investigators gave her a direct contact in case one of them showed up at her home. However, during the analysis of the evidence, investigators discovered something new. Didn't make sense. Among the evidence was a medical report that caught their attention. Stated that Brittany Norwood had not been sexually assaulted and described the injuries found on her body, some on her arms and some on her legs. But the most noticeable were a cut on her forehead, scratch on her back, and a 5-centimeter cut on her right thumb. Compared to the wounds inflicted on Jana, what had been done to Brittany was almost nothing. But why would she lie about the violence? Another witness came forward, Brittany and Jana's boss. She recalled the situation on the night of the attack. She said that around 10 p.m., she received a call from Brittany, who said she had forgotten her wallet in the store and asked her to contact Jana to come back and open the door for her. Jana closed the store every night and was the only one with a key. 4 days after the attack, investigators began to suspect that Brittany might be hiding something. She became a person of interest in the investigation. Since Brittany had to provide hair samples and fingerprints, investigators told her they needed to meet with her later that day for further questioning. They never told her she was a person of interest in the investigation, but only said the samples were needed to rule out her presence at the crime scene, which is a routine procedure when someone other than the suspect is present at the crime scene. However, the purpose was clear, to see if they could prove that Brittany had actually committed the attack, which was very important as it could uncover inconsistencies in her story since she was already a suspect. The interrogation lasted 2 hours and 55 minutes. First hour was spent collecting samples, and the remaining time was spent questioning Brittany's statement. She repeatedly mentioned that the attackers were 2 white men. She was asked if she knew what kind of car Jana drove, but she said she didn't. Brittany provided more details, mentioned her fear of confronting one of them, and cried when talking about Jana. The investigators let her go and asked her to return on March 18th at 10 a.m. The officers were waiting for decisive evidence to make an arrest. And that evidence was surveillance footage from a parking lot near Lululemon, showing Brittany driving the victim's car alone. The interrogation on March 18th, Brittany's 4th, began normally. She stated she was looking forward to moving to Seattle to live with her brother Chris, and her only concern about the move was that she wanted to continue helping with the investigations. The lead officer then asked Brittany again about Jana's car. Again, she responded that she didn't know what kind of car her colleague drove. The detective then showed her a photo of Brittany parking Jana's car on the night of the attack in a lot near the crime scene. Brittany then said that the attackers had forced her to drive the car there, and that they had constantly followed her. When she arrived at the parking lot, she saw a police car, but did not call for help because she allegedly feared for her life. However, from the Lululemon store, she couldn't be seen at all because she turned right after 2 blocks and was simply no longer visible, which contradicted her statement that she was allegedly followed. The detective told Britney that he didn't believe her story, that there were inconsistencies, and that everything was made up. She was read her rights and arrested on suspicion of murdering Jayna Murray. By this time, several pieces of evidence had already been analyzed. DNA from Jayna's fingernails confirmed that the scratch on Britney's back was inflicted by Jayna during the attack, likely in self-defense. Although not many surveillance recordings were found, the existing ones showed only Britney and not the 2 masked men. Additionally, the woman had never been sexually assaulted. She withheld details and changed many others to make it look like 2 people had committed the assault. Prosecution also had witnesses against Britney, including former soccer teammates from a university in New York, who said Britney was nice but had a small problem. She was a kleptomaniac. She constantly stole and was expelled from the university and lost her scholarship because of it. It was also proven that the wound on her right thumb was inflicted while she was attacking Jayna. It was also found that she had tied her own hands to simulate an attack. Several wounds on her body were self-inflicted, and she lied for days to both the authorities and her family, who had been convinced of her innocence for months. Additionally, it was proven that the bloody male footprint found in the store was made by Britney herself, using a training device later found in the store. The most challenging part of the trial was proving why Britney brutally murdered Jayna and what her motive was. 5 items Britney allegedly used to inflict wounds on Jayna's body were presented as evidence: a hammer, a dagger, a coat hanger, a stick from one of the coat hangers, and a Swiss Army knife. It was proven that the motive was not to steal money, as the missing money from the locker was hidden in the same room. In October, the trial began. The evidence was so overwhelming that Britney Norwood pleaded guilty to self-defense, claiming the attack occurred after Jayna said mean things to her and attacked her first. The trial lasted 6 days, and the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder. On January 27, 2012, the judge announced the verdict, sentencing her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It's clear that she killed Jayna. The evidence is conclusive, and she partially admitted to killing her, although she claimed it was in self-defense. But the question remains, why? Although the prosecution labeled the attack as revenge for being caught stealing a pair of sports pants, Britney never explained the real reason, and what transpired between them made the attack so aggressive. Many believe the true motive was envy. Britney was jealous of Jayna's life, and that the murder might not have been because of a small theft, but because Britney wanted Jayna's life, which she could never have, due to her own poverty. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel, and take care of yourselves. See you in the next video. In January 2006, a woman disappeared in Linwood, Washington, USA. She attended a club for Alcoholics Anonymous and never missed a single meeting without a valid reason. She was a role model, having been sober for 8 years at the time of the mentioned event. However, she eventually stopped visiting her friends who were struggling with similar problems. They thought the missing woman had relapsed into her addiction. But it turned out that something much more horrific had happened to her. Nicole Pitts was born in late January 1973. The girl grew up in King County and was educated at Eastern Washington College. The family traveled to Seattle in the summer and spent most of their time at Lake Sammamish. Nicole had a close relationship with her mother, Gil, and also a good relationship with her stepfather, named Rod. Nicole met her future husband, David, in the 90s while working at a fitness club. They understood each other immediately and soon considered a romantic relationship and life together. The couple married only in 2002 after they confirmed their feeling. Their wedding was very beautiful and took place on the island of Maui, Hawaii. In 2005, the couple bought an apartment in Linwood, Washington, where they could spend their time in their favorite environment. At the time of their move, it was a developed but quiet town with less than 40,000 inhabitants. It had narrow streets, numerous bars and restaurants. It was very similar to their previous residence, and the young family fell in love with this place from the first moment. The woman was sociable and had many friends. Even in a new place, Nicole made new acquaintances within a few days, developing good friendships with some of them. She loved animals, often walked her dogs in the neighborhood, or relaxed at home with a few cats. Animals meant everything to her, and she took care of them like small children. Nicole was also professionally successful. After her education, she worked for a while in a fitness club, then became a manager in a mobile phone company. She lived not far from her office, and the commute to and from work took no longer than 20 minutes. Nicole proved to be a valuable team member, easily finding a common language with all employees and helping solve everyone's problems. However, she also had problems. As a teenager, she was introduced to alcohol and later became addicted to it. This happened at the time when her parents divorced and she felt broken. Her mother worked as a flight attendant and was often traveling, leaving Nicole without proper supervision at her grandmother's, who was already quite old, so the girl got involved with bad company. The parents became aware of their daughter's problem in time. Fortunately, with the help and support of relatives, she managed to quit this harmful habit. Together, they attended Alcoholics Anonymous groups where Nicole could speak out, making it easier for her. However, her alcohol consumption did not go without consequences, causing serious health problems. As a result, Nicole was diagnosed with endometriosis at the age of 21 and underwent 3 surgeries, after which she was prescribed constant pain medication. According to her relatives, she took the medication only to cope with the pain that tormented her. By 2006, the 32-year-old woman had already stayed away from alcohol for 8 years, but remained a valued member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Nicole never missed a meeting, because it was not only an opportunity for her to deal with her problem, but also to help others overcome the disease together. Nicole knew what it meant to fight and inspired everyone around her, her optimism and success. From a young age, she loved to cook, and this interest developed as she got older. She enjoyed bringing various dishes she had prepared herself directly to her husband at work, which he loved her for. Nicole talked to her mother daily, with whom she was very close. The beginning of 2006, Nicole looked forward to her 33rd birthday on January 27. Just 2 days before her birthday, she unexpectedly did not appear at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting in the nearby town of Renton. David came home late from work that day and went straight to bed. According to him, his wife was still at home. However, the next morning, she left the house, and he never saw his wife again. David tried to call her to ask if everything was okay, but Nicole ignored all the calls. The man thought that his wife might be upset because he did not talk to her during dinner the previous evening, which was her habit, and went straight to bed because he was tired. So, he thought about how to apologize to his wife and went to work. Throughout the day, he kept trying to call his beloved, but she remained silent, and this began to worry him. Therefore, the husband contacted several of her friends and her mother, but no one had seen Nicole. In the evening, the man returned home and found his wife was not there. When she did not come for dinner, he decided to contact the police. Nicole's husband called the sheriff's office that evening, but was told that not enough time had passed to consider the woman missing. The man managed to persuade the officers to check her whereabouts, believing that his wife's behavior was completely uncharacteristic, and he strongly suspected that something had happened to her. Investigators arrived at the couple's apartment, where, besides Nicole, her Volkswagen Jetta was also missing. She was on her usual way to work in the morning, but disappeared somewhere between Linwood and Renton. The missing woman's mother and stepfather were also worried about her disappearance. The woman had not received a call from her daughter all day, and considered this a bad sign. The parents of the missing woman supported his decision to contact the police. The officers called Nicole's social circle, and after ensuring that no one had seen her since her disappearance, began searching for her. That same day, the missing woman's family booked a flight to Washington. They hoped for the best and wanted to provide any possible assistance to find their daughter as quickly as possible. Everyone was bewildered, as Nicole was a very reliable and responsible person. She would never disappear or ignore attempts to contact her. Even if she couldn't respond immediately, she would call back soon. The longer her silence lasted, the more worried her parents and husband became. Everyone involved in the search for Nicole immediately set to work. Even her mother and stepfather rushed to the police as soon as they flew into the city. Members of the Alcoholics Anonymous Club, who loved Nicole dearly and wanted to help her family, also participated in the search and rescue operation. This club was very important to her. Not only did she never miss a meeting, but this time she was supposed to receive a reward for 8 years of sobriety, of which she was very proud. There was no single reason for her to go somewhere and leave all her affairs behind. Nicole's answering machine was overflowing with calls from dozens of friends and family members, but not a single one got through. Some thought she might be facing alcohol problems again, although she had successfully managed her addiction for years. The reality, however, was much more frightening. In the meantime, the police were not only busy searching for the missing woman, but also looking for her car. Every neighborhood in Linwood was combed, but without success. The missing woman's parents, Rod and Gail, were not idle either. They set up a website to receive information about their missing daughter. Although there were reactions to their plight, most of the messages left by users were wishes for the search's success, and the remaining information was false. The search seemed to be at a dead end until chance intervened. On February 7th, a local jogger in the Sunset Park Forest area, where there was a small lake, decided to take a shortcut through the plantation's outskirts and stumbled upon a strange object under a blackberry bush. From a distance, he couldn't make out what it was, so he decided to approach closer and was horrified to find the naked body of a woman. The man immediately called the police. Officers familiar with the Nicole Pitts case were working in the forest. They immediately identified the body as hers. It was evident to the naked eye that the woman had not died of natural causes. Since she was not wearing clothes, it was assumed that she had been raped and that this was probably the motive for the crime. However, the medical examiner determined that it was not a rape. After an autopsy in the lab, it was found that the deceased had sustained several injuries during the blows. The cause of death was suffocation. Numerous blunt force injuries were found on the woman's body, including on her legs, torso, and head. Nicole's murder was extremely brutal, suggesting a personal motive stemming from hatred. But who would do such a thing to Nicole if she had no enemies? The case was reclassified from disappearance to murder. The news of Nicole's murder was devastating for her husband and parents. They couldn't believe that their loved one was gone. Investigators began tracing the victim's last movements, reviewing her bank card transaction. It turned out that she had last used it on January 30th in a neighboring town, where she paid for gas. Investigators requested video footage from the gas station, suspecting that the murderer might have used her card, and they had the chance to see him on the recording. While waiting for the footage, officers continued searching for the victim's car, as it could provide crucial data for the investigation. They re-examined the identity of the murdered woman and her social circle. There were no leads. Nicole was one of the friendliest women at her workplace and in her club. She had no enemies and could never have had any. She was a loyal friend, a loving wife, tender daughter, a competent employee, and loved her pets. She even turned her own addiction to good use by supporting people who couldn't follow her example, giving up alcohol. While investigators used their methods to find the car, family and friends were not idle. They began actively reporting the missing car and their loved ones' whereabouts. The relatives made a public appeal, asking people to watch for the car and not to touch it if found. Flyers stated that the car was involved in a woman's murder and instructed people to call the police immediately. This helped. Attentive residents found Nicole's car on February 21, 2006. It was parked near Washington University. The vehicle was immediately seized for laboratory analysis. Law enforcement hoped to find clues about the perpetrator and reconstruct the chain of events that led to the tragedy. They found a large amount of trash and items in the car, ranging from books to sports equipment. The police were interested in something more significant, such as a data carrier, ideally the victim's phone. Investigators found out that someone had continued using the woman's ID and credit card after her disappearance. They were missing from the car and the victim's apartment. Investigators actively pursued the theory that Nicole's car might have broken down on the road, and she was picked up by a stranger who brutally attacked her. The car was in an unusual place, since Nicole had to drive to another town. Based on the seat position, the car was driven by someone significantly larger and stronger than Nicole. In the lab, the seat position was carefully measured to gather information about the likely perpetrator. Additionally, DNA traces, hair, and a single fingerprint were found inside the car. All this was meticulously collected and matched with databases. Meanwhile, several patrol officers went to the area where the car was found and questioned residents of the surrounding houses to see if anyone had seen the moment when the murdered woman's car appeared in the parking lot or the driver who parked it. This led to no results, even though the car had been parked there since February 10th. The police determined this because a parking ticket dated February 10th for unauthorized parking was found on the windshield. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras to help with the investigation. Forensic examination results, ordered to evaluate the found DNA traces, didn't take long. All DNA traces belonged to Nicole and David, with no foreign samples found in the car, which was strange, leaving the investigation with no new information to solve the crime. By early April, there were still no leads. The missing woman's mother and stepfather offered a reward of $10,000 for anyone providing information leading to the capture of the perpetrator. The family and friends of the victim wanted to stir up public interest. This could not only help obtain valuable information, but also have a psychological effect. Usually, murderers follow the developments after the crime. An active movement could not go unnoticed. Police officers love this technique because the criminals get nervous and make mistakes. To this end, the mother repeatedly appeared on various TV channels. During this time, her family had to return to Arizona due to work, but remained in constant contact with the investigating officers. The mother and stepfather were deeply affected by the tragedy, as Nicole was very close to both of them. The husband was inconsolable and frustrated by the lengthy investigation, but nothing advanced the investigation. Weeks turned into months without results. In September of that year, the case was handed over to another investigator who was highly experienced in his field. At that time, investigators were still gathering information about the woman's movements and trying to form a complete picture. The new investigator immediately applied for a search warrant for the house where the murdered woman lived. It turned out that this had not been done yet. The new investigator wanted to search the house and her belongings for clues, especially to check Nicole's computer data. They found no trace of the crime, no blood, or other clues in the house. There was also nothing of interest on the computer. David supported the investigation, but processing the massive amount of data took a long time. During this time, investigators continued to talk to witnesses and people who knew the victim, including 62-year-old Barbara, who had befriended the deceased after meeting her at the Alcoholics Anonymous Club. On the day of the disappearance, they were supposed to meet for coffee in the evening, but Nicole did not show up. Her friend initially thought she was late, but that was unlike her. So Barbara tried calling Nicole. She tried several times that day, but none of the calls were answered by the missing woman. It had been exactly a year since Nicole was murdered. For her family and friends, it had been torture. The police had a massive workload during this time, yet they never managed to catch the brutal criminal. At this point, the parents of the deceased were in a house in Arizona, suffering from the consequences of a murder committed by a monster. Their pain had not diminished over the year. Rob and Gail were desperate and decided to hire a private investigator. They couldn't make sense of the inconsistencies in the case that kept cropping up, like Nicole leaving the house without her wedding ring, which was entirely out of character for a woman so proud of her marriage and who would never under any circumstances take off the symbol of her marriage. The private investigator got to work, but it was unsuccessful. In July of the following year, parents of the victim increased the reward for clues to the murderer to $25,000, with another $1,000 added by organizations involved in crime prevention and the search for missing persons. The excitement over these events was still present in the city, as the residents realized that a dangerous criminal was on the loose. He apparently had no motive, meaning he could be a maniac who could strike again at any time. Another year passed without new information about the murderer. Then, the stepfather and mother of the victim increased the fund by another $10,000. The police again applied for a search warrant to examine the missing woman's computer. Investigators were confident that it could contain information pointing to the perpetrator. In October 2009, a private investigator hired by the couple was charged with theft. Although it did not concern the heroes of our story, the man deceived one of his clients, claiming he had found evidence in the case but needed money to process it. The grieving parents gave him additional money, after which the investigator disappeared and immediately took another job. His license was subsequently revoked as the court found he did this regularly. Thus, Nicole's parents were left without a private investigator and without any clues to the murderer. By 2011, the anniversary of Nicole's death marked 5 years. During this time, a suspect was sought, but no information was released. This was because law enforcement had enough evidence to prove involvement in the murder. However, soon there was a breakthrough. On March 21, 2012, a suspect was finally arrested. It was the husband of the murdered woman, David Pitts. At that time, investigators believed they had gathered enough evidence against the murderer. He was detained with bail set at $1 million, which he could not afford, and remained behind bars. According to the prosecutor, the case could only be advanced thanks to innovative technologies that were simply not available before. This was primarily due to the development and introduction of more precise DNA processing techniques and the advancement of mobile communication, which is now easier to trace. Since investigators could not identify any enemies of the victim, they immediately focused on the spouse of the deceased, as in such cases, partners are usually involved. Moreover, his statements about the previous evening sounded unconvincing. Investigators also assumed that only 2 people's fingerprints were found in Nicole's car, hers and her husband. If a stranger had been in the car, there would have been fingerprints left, because they were not wiped. The perpetrator had wiped the fingerprints. None would have been in the car. Reclined driver's seat matched David's proportion. A man who looked very much like David was captured by the gas station's surveillance cameras. He had also used his wife's phone after her disappearance, making several calls in different parts of the city. The officers suspected that the perpetrator was trying to confuse the investigation this way. Using modern tracking technology, the exact locations from which the calls were made were determined, and Nicole could not have been there. She was already dead at that time. Her husband's phone was pinged at the same locations. The murder method was strangulation, which is usually personal. Some evidence found at the crime scene indicated that the perpetrator was much closer to the victim than initially assumed. It also matched the fact that the woman had not been sexually assaulted. Nicole's mouth had a dental retainer she used while sleeping, meaning she was killed at night or early in the morning while still in bed. This is also indicated by her appearance. The woman was unclothed and her feet and hands were completely clean. There were no defensive wounds, suggesting she did not resist and was simply brought there. To determine the exact time of death, medical examiners examined the stomach contents of the victim. They found that the food Nicole had eaten the previous evening had not been digested, indicating she was killed before she woke up in the morning and went to work. The only unclear thing was the perpetrator's motive. At first glance, they seemed to be loving spouses with a wonderful, warm relationship and feelings. However, it turned out that it was all just a show, and there were many reasons for the act. At that time, family was in serious financial trouble. On the day of the murder, David was supposed to receive a promotion they had been looking forward to. When he returned with nothing, he was initially very unsure. The family head was a partygoer, enjoying alcohol and smoking weed. Large part of the family budget went to his pleasures. Nicole, on the other hand, had invested much time and effort to overcome this addiction and had been sober for many years. David envied his wife for this. Additionally, the man had an affair on the side. The investigation revealed that during his relationship with the murdered woman, David had at least 4 different girlfriends. His extravagant lifestyle led him to constantly try to persuade his wife to have a threesome. Once he drugged her in a club and tried to persuade her, but she continued to refuse, which she did not like. The man constantly accused his wife of being too boring. Nicole, on the other hand, blamed him for spending too much money on fun and alcohol and said it was time for him to settle down. In his club fun, he met women with whom he had sexual intercourse. David, who appeared to the police officers as a grieving widower, was actually not one. He did not wait long to mourn his wife's death. In the first days after Nicole's disappearance, he began looking for new lovers. When he was arrested, David already had another family and a child. For the victim's parents, this was very painful, as their daughter always dreamed of having children, but he wanted nothing to do with it. Additionally, the victim's husband immediately started collecting certificates to get a substantial sum in life insurance for his murdered wife. After establishing all these facts, the puzzle came together, and David was summoned for questioning, where he denied his involvement in the murder. When asked to take a lie detector test, he agreed. The technology showed that he was lying. All this confirmed the thoughts of the victim's mother and stepfather. From the beginning, they believed that Nicole's husband was responsible for her death and had informed the investigators about it. After all these years, the investigators had evidence against him. The man was arrested and charged with murder. David categorically denied his involvement in the crime. The trial began in September 2013, 7 years after Nicole's death. Her family and friends were in the courtroom, where justice was supposed to prevail. The murderer's lawyer tried to attribute the crime to Nicole having relapsed into her alcohol addiction and possibly becoming dependent on prescription drugs, as an empty bottle of prescription pills was found during the bathroom search. The defense argued that all evidence against David was circumstantial and that the case was fabricated and based on speculation. Nicole's parents testified in court that the deceased's husband never participated in searches or distributed flyers, only pretending to be upset. At the same time, they knew about the marital problems between the couple. Regarding the pills, the mother noted that it was a prescription painkiller prescribed to Nicole for severe pain after she injured her back shortly before her death, significantly improving her condition. The lawyers not only tried to delay the trial, but also confused the jury. Even if the medication was needed for pain relief rather than addiction, it in no way justified the brutal murder of the woman. After reading all the case materials, the jury began deliberations, which lasted 6 hours. In the end, they found 36-year-old David Pitts guilty of murdering his own wife. According to Washington state law, he faced 10 to 18 years in prison. The man was sentenced to the maximum sentence of 18 years in prison. He had been the prime suspect from the beginning, but it took a long 7 years to prove his guilt. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourself.
On February 9, 2011, police officers made a horrific discovery in a regular apartment in Maywood, USA. Human remains were found in bags in the refrigerator and also on the walls. Satanic symbols were seen everywhere, indicating that a sacrificial ritual had taken place in the house. Amelia Espinosa was a devoted mother, which becomes evident when studying her life. Although most details of this woman's biography remain strictly confidential, we managed to find out that she was apparently born in Mexico in the late 1960s. Like many of her compatriots, she emigrated to the United States, where she spent her entire adult life. She was not alone. According to the limited information available, her other relatives also lived there, and they supported each other. At around 24 years old, Amelia gave birth to her first and only child, the beginning of the 1990s. The young mother decided to name her firstborn Moses in honor of the founder of Judaism. His full name is Moses Miras Espinosa, and from that moment, Amelia dedicated herself entirely to her son, ensuring that the little boy had everything he needed. Not much is known about the father, only his last name, Miras. The information suggests that he was not always present in Moses' life, but they maintained a relationship and communicated, especially during difficult times. Over time, the small family found their home in Maywood, a small town in southeast Los Angeles, California. There, in a pink apartment complex next to an alley, mother and son moved into apartment number 11. The neighbors soon witnessed Amelia's devotion to her firstborn, but it later turned out that the boy had a fondness for a type of creepy music, which deeply disturbed the woman. She was ashamed that he disturbed the peace of society in this way. As is often the case with teenagers, Moses' musical preferences prevailed. There was no shortage of people who labeled the young man's peculiar taste as an obsession, especially for heavy metal. In return, Moses delved deeper into the world of death metal, an extreme subgenre characterized by distorted sound from low-tuned guitars. When he turned up the volume, no one nearby could ignore this music. In the heavy metal universe, King Diamond became Moses' favorite singer. His real name is Kim Bendix Peterson, a Danish musician considered one of the 100 most influential metal singers due to his distinctive voice, bizarre makeup, lyrics, and special effects in his song. He is regarded as a unique representative of the genre, but an aspect that certainly cemented his fame was his peculiar view of Satanism. King Diamond was especially a follower of the atheistic Satanism movement, founded in the 1960s by American occultist and writer Anton LaVey. This cult had its own satanic Bible, and for King, it was not just a religion, but a philosophy of life. This made him one of the true representatives of satanic metal rock in the 1980s. In his scandalous and deeply blasphemous lyrics, Anton LaVey explained his tolerance towards various religious beliefs and also pointed out that what he considered truly alarming was humanity's ability to destroy each other in the name of God. Amelia was extremely worried about her son's strange taste and tried to convince him to diversify his musical choices, but according to neighbors, this made him angry. Moses had now chosen the dark side of his rock metal star legacy, and one of the first things he did was to buy a satanic Bible. Additionally, he added God Grin to the catalog of his preferences, a musical subgenre from the late 1980s, where the voices are so subdued that they create a frightening and even oppressive atmosphere, similar to the voices traditionally used in horror films for devilish or possessed characters. According to analysts, death metal represents fear and a certain desire to control everything perceived as a threat. Its symbolism is full of scenarios of death, destruction, supernatural horror, and violence in general. This was the world Moses immersed himself in day after day. Furthermore, he was always dressed in black and covered his body with tattoos featuring symbols that his mother found disturbing. At that time, Amelia worked as a seamstress and was a mother like any other. She always cooked meals for her son, washed his clothes, and took care of him. To their neighbors, she was a charming woman, and the impression of Moses was that he was an ordinary young man like most of the area's residents. Although Amelia neither understood nor shared her son's taste, she generally treated him with enough respect. The real reason for their frequent arguments was the music the young man listened to at full volume, especially since it disturbed the neighbor's peace. However, all other aspects of Moses' daily life, be it his social life, interests, dreams, fears, or even his psychological profile, could not be uncovered. Some reports indicate that he met a girl named Monica around mid-2010, They fell in love so deeply that they soon lived together and then both got jobs at a cookie factory. Day by day, the couple left the house with high spirits, holding hands and making plans for the future on the way. It seemed that Moses was on the right path. As his colleague Alfonso Baltasar observed, it didn't take long for the man to prove himself. He was punctual, never missed work, took his job seriously, and soon his supervisors began considering promoting him. At the same time, he and Monica wanted to study. But one day, the girl was hit by a car on the way to the factory, and it was not possible to save her. Since then, the young man's behavior changed. It is unclear whether this had happened before, but it is clear that Moses became heavily involved in the consumption of illegal psychoactive substances to cope with the pain of losing his soulmate. From that point on, violent outbursts became increasingly frequent and difficult to control. Amelia was exhausted and confused. At the age of 18, Moses locked himself in the house and within himself, and within those four walls, quarrels between him and his mother became a daily occurrence. Meanwhile, another person was worried about Moses's behavior. Liliana Rivera, his cousin, the only relative besides Amelia whose name was revealed. At the same time, rumors among the neighbors already suggested that Amelia was afraid of her son, who was becoming increasingly aggressive and disrespectful. In late 2010, Liliana began to fear that he might harm himself or someone else because he was too involved in the satanic world. Wednesday, February 2, 2011, was not much different from any other day in the family. Moreover, there was another fierce argument between Moses and his mother. Everything indicates that Amelia once again reproached him for the loud music from his room. But this time, evil finally found a willing servant. For no apparent reason, Moses drew the curtains, turned up the volume even more, and used a rope to block the blood flow to the neck of his then 42-year-old mother. The cries for help of the woman who gave him life were drowned out by the deep chords and the voice of King Diamond from the speakers. In the end, Amelia succumbed to the attack by the person she loved most in the world. After what happened, Moses went to bed. Over the next 2 days, he considered various ways to dispose of the body. His gaze was lost until finally, his insight and instinct gave him the answer. Armed with power tools, he disposed of the remains. The operation was carried out in the bathroom. Packaged parts were then placed in the living room freezer, and then everything happened as prescribed in satanic rituals, with the use of crosses and symbols. But after a few days, Moses began to doubt his method and wondered how long he could endure like this. He climbed onto the roof of the house, put a flower pot on his head, and sat there for quite some time. Neighbors noticed his strange behavior, but assumed he was probably under the influence of illegal substances. Epifanio Hernandez, the manager of the apartment complex, told ABC News that he spoke to the young man for several days because he needed to enter the house. Moses came up with all sorts of excuses to keep him out. The neighbors were equally concerned when they saw that Amelia had not left the house for several days. They came and asked if she was okay and if they could visit her. But Moses didn't let anyone into the apartment. Epifanio explained that he was installing new sinks in all the kitchens of the apartments and insisted on entering Amelia's house, but the guy told him to come next week. All these people's concern for his mother and the urgent work of installing a new sink made Moses think it was urgently necessary to remove Amelia's remains from the house. Then he remembered that his cousin Liliana was a follower of Santeria. It was not clarified whether his concern was to get rid of problems or if it was merely to confirm his absurd act. In any case, he contacted Liliana and asked what the worst thing followers of Santeria had ever done. Given his behavior and his peculiar approach to the conversation, Liliana immediately got into her car and headed to her cousin's house. Moses was waiting in front of the house when she arrived. Liliana asked where her aunt was, to which he replied that she was not at home. But the girl had a premonition, and this time it was very bad. She insisted and asked where she was. When Moses said that Amelia had just left, Liliana felt a wave of fear wash over her. Soon, Moses confessed what he had done, but she didn't believe him. The girl said that couldn't be true. Then Liliana, with a trembling voice, asked how it happened, and Moses began to describe the entire sequence of events in detail, including the fate of the bones, skin, and weapons he used. Her cousin didn't miss any detail. He even told her that the music was used to drown out the menacing noise of the chainsaw and to avoid arousing suspicion among the neighbors. At the end of his story, Moses made a statement that was no less horrifying than the story itself. He said that after the fatal attack on his mother, he felt at peace. Moreover, he claimed that from the moment of the act, he felt like an angel. It had already been about a week, and then he asked Liliana to help him dispose of the remains. In a state of shock, with barely audible trembling in her voice, she managed to convince him to surrender, and she took him to the Huntington Park police station in South Los Angeles. Upon arrival, even before they entered the police station, Moses called his father and told him that Amelia was no longer among the living. She was sleeping, and that he had helped her leave. Since his words were quite confusing and interrupted by sobs, it was difficult for the father to understand what he was talking about. A few minutes later, Moses entered the police station. Clock showed exactly 1 p.m. when he confronted the first officer he encountered. He gave a detailed account of the crime he had committed, and when an officer arrived to take him to East Los Angeles, he was asked if he knew why he was being arrested. Moses once again answered truthfully and openly. To this officer, the guy provided an additional detail he hadn't mentioned before. Since the remains were still in the apartment he shared with his mother, the police immediately went to the house and found what can only be described as the epitome of a horror movie. In the middle of the living room lay a toppled refrigerator on the floor, and like an evil aura that one could not get rid of or even forget, stench permeated every air particle. When they opened the refrigerator, they found plastic bags containing the remains. More bags were found on the walls, a circular saw with blood, flesh, and bone fragments, and a knife in the shower. The walls in the bathroom were covered with plastic sheeting, kind painters used to protect against paint splatters, and secured with tape. Additionally, blood particles were visible in this part of the house. Further, in the adjacent room, there was a rack, and on it, the police found human bones and a skull with painted crosses. The officers also found an aerosol cleaner, which likely indicated an attempt to cover up the incident. In a search of Moses' bedroom, next to his laptop, a collection of disturbing items was found, including DVD of the movie Saw and a satanic Bible, the chapter on human sacrifice marked. Given everything they had observed so far, it was impossible to overlook the drawings on the closet door. All the images there were related to diabolical beliefs. When the neighbors saw the police officers, they said that Amelia had been afraid of her son's outbursts of aggression and had scolded him for going out at night to meet people with a dubious reputation for illegal substance consumption. Hours later, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department confirmed to the media that the body had been found. Coroner Brian Elias warned that the body could not be properly identified as it had been dismembered. As expected, the news caused an outcry. Meanwhile, Moses was detained by the sheriff and arrested on suspicion of committing the violent acts that led to his mother Amelia's death. After the news hit TV screens and public interest surged, many journalists attempted to contact the victims' relatives, hoping to shed light on this dark event. However, the only one who agreed to speak, although she refused to reveal her name or even show her face, was Liliana. Finally, autopsy results were released, and the forensic investigation revealed the cause of death to be asphyxiation, due to compression of the neck. It also described in detail all the manipulations done to the body. Meanwhile, the prosecution, ahead of the trial, tried to present numerous photos of the remains as evidence. After reviewing the images, the lower court excluded several of them, deeming them excessively violent. According to the prosecutor handling the case, Herb Marr, Moses' fatal attack on his mother was neither in the heat of passion nor impulsive or reckless. He argued that it was carried out with the intention of devotion to all dark forces, and was therefore the ultimate sacrifice. On Tuesday, February 8, 2011, Moses was officially charged with murder. But, incredibly, he pleaded not guilty. Bail in this case was set at $1 million, a figure typically set in cases where authorities are trying to keep a suspect behind bars due to their dangerousness. As a result, Moses was placed in custody at a correctional facility, with his next appearance before the East Los Angeles Municipal Court scheduled for February 23rd. If convicted of the brutal killing of his mother, he faced a maximum sentence of 25 years to life imprisonment. Already during the trial, the jury was shocked by the detailed report of the pathologist who testified about the deplorable condition of the body he had examined. For example, he mentioned that the fingertips appeared to have been individually removed, the sharp instrument, the entire scalp had been removed except for the eyelids. All the teeth had been extracted with their roots. Then, the testimony of an expert in the study of ritual symbols and unknown practices was presented, concluding that the position of the body suggested that Moses' actions were of a ritualistic nature. According to the specialist, each of the man's actions had magical significance for the perpetrator and was generally a necessary function of the ritual. This meant that dismemberment and other actions were not intended to make evidence disappear, but had ritual significance, served some purpose, and were primarily a form of worship. The absolute horror was evident on the faces of both the judge and the other attendees in the courtroom. When asked about the disposal of the body in the present case, the expert stated that the measures taken went far beyond what was necessary for the simple disposal of a body. Moreover, the expert identified some of the symbolic images found on Moses's laptop, in other parts of the apartment, and on the walls as satanic symbols or traces linked to similar beliefs. Some of them were associated with the musician King Diamond, whom the expert described as a self-proclaimed follower of the Satanist Anton LaVey. Then the expert presented new information that shocked everyone even more. He explained that the date of the incident, February 2nd, indicated that the fatal attack on Amelia was not random but deliberate, as it coincided with a satanic holiday requiring very specific rituals, including human or animal sacrifice. At this point, Moses' lawyer, Jonathan Roberts, interjected, arguing that his client's involvement with the Satanic Church had been exaggerated, and adding that modern Satanists do not permit human sacrifice. The truth was that after hearing all the expert testimonies, examining the evidence, and listening to the arguments from both sides, it took the Superior Court only one day to find Moses Miras Espinosa guilty of first-degree murder of his mother, Amelia Espinosa. During sentencing, Los Angeles Supreme Court Judge Thomas McNew described the case as one of the most heinous, cruel, and vulgar he had encountered in nearly 50 years of his career. He sentenced Moses to life imprisonment, the possibility of parole, after 25 years. Before being taken out of the courtroom, the judge spoke directly to Moses, telling him that although he didn't know how he could change his life, he now had time to think about it. Moses' father was present in the courtroom, as were several family members. The young man looked at them as he was led out of the courtroom, said nothing.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel, and take care of yourselves. See you in the next video.